Today it's time for another Q&A. On the community tab in YouTube, I put a post a couple of weeks ago asking for your questions, and we got some great ones this time. I also put a post on Facebook about 10 minutes ago asking for questions there as well. So if you are part of the Facebook group, you got to be quick and you got to keep an eye on the posts. Now, if you're a Facebook hater, and I know there's a few of you out there, just stick to the YouTube community tab, and this is where I'll put all of the questions. Now, if I pronounce your names a little bit wrong, I'm really sorry. I'll try my best, but sometimes I might miss the mark a little bit. The first question I'm going to answer is from Jim Barnes, and Jim asks, what do you think is more important, the camera body or the lens? Now, obviously they're both important because without one or the other, you can't actually take a photo. But if you have a cheap camera with a really expensive lens, you can still get some quite good images. Whereas if you have an expensive camera with cheap lenses, you don't get such a good image. So the lens quality really does matter. So to answer your question, the lens is more important, but you do need both. The next question is from Deepal Patil, and he asks, how do you get out of a creative rut? Now, I think I've done a short video on this, but the main thing to get out of a rut is to set yourself a challenge. And that's why a couple of weeks ago, I did set a photo challenge. I'm going to address that in a future video and make a video on the images that you've shared on that Facebook group. But the main thing is just to start setting yourself a challenge and actually say, I'm going to go out on Saturday and take a photograph. Don't worry about whether it's a good one or bad one, just go out and use your camera and set yourself a specific goal. So say for instance, you might have a location that you've always been wanting to shoot. Go to that location, go at sunrise or sunset and set that time and stick to it. Go out and take photos of that subject and then come back and edit them on the same day. Now, if you do this already, then that probably won't get you out of a rut. So if you are a landscape photographer and you're in a rut, go and photograph something completely different. Get some friends around, hire some lights and do a portrait shoot, or do something else, something completely different. About a year ago, I did get into a rut, and my good friend Rai invited me along to the 24-hour race at the Autodrome here in Dubai. Now, I spent most of the night shooting racing cars and then the rest of the day as well. I was absolutely knackered by the end of it, but that really did reignite my photography bug. I have shot a lot of sports before, but I'd gotten out of the habit of going along to events or going down to the beach and shooting surfers or kite surfers or things like that. So this really did reignite that photography bug. And it also helped in other branches of photography as well. So it got me out shooting more landscapes. It got me out doing more portraits. So try something completely different, set yourself a goal and go out and shoot it. Rex asks, which photos do you like most you made so far and why? A couple of years ago, my wife and I went to the Dolomites in Italy, and the place is absolutely fantastic. If you ever get the chance to go there, do it and don't hesitate. The landscape is absolutely fantastic, and if you get good weather, you can get some amazing shots. And I think even when the weather is a little bit rubbish, you can still get some quite good shots as long as the clouds aren't down on the mountains. Here we went to Trecime quite a few times. It's quite a significant landmark and there's lots of tourists there. But we went first thing in the morning, and we actually went pretty much about 3 o'clock in the morning, probably if not 2 o'clock in the morning. And we hiked around it and I got some fantastic shots from there. My favorites do change over time, and when I do take a new one that I really like, that sometimes becomes my favorite. But my favorite one at the moment is taken from the lake just down from Trecime in the Dolomites. And it's from the small lake called Lago d'Antorno. And I think I pronounced that right. If not, I apologize to all my Italian friends. Another image that I took that I really like is from Mount Bromo in Java. This was when the sun was rising, we were at the viewpoint and we'd hiked up there instead of getting the jeeps, and the sun just hit all of the craters. This is an active volcano. I got my zoom. I think I was at 600 millimeters and I had to crop in a little bit more, but it was of the ladder or staircase going up the side of the volcano. There were a couple of people stood at the top and the sun just caught it perfectly. And it was this bright red, brown, I think you had the orange from the sun and then the brown color from the ash and the dirt. They were almost interacting and made it really bright red. It's a fantastic place to go. And again, if If you ever get the chance to go to Mount Bromo in Java, don't hesitate. The next question is from Rosino, and he asks, do you have a mountain bike channel? Unfortunately, I don't have a mountain bike channel. I would like one, but I just don't have the time to do it. And here in Dubai, it's quite flat. We do have some fantastic tracks to the east, but they are quite dusty. And once you've ridden in the Alps, you've been kind of spoiled. We went to Solden in Austria. We had ski lifts to take us up and massive tracks coming down. So I've been a little bit spoiled. So I always just like going back to Austria and places like that mountain biking. In saying that, if I lived in Austria, I probably would set one up because the mountain biking there is absolutely fantastic. Got another question from Fred Wilsonak, and he said, give us a challenge and set a period of time to complete it. He also says, I keep thinking, ooh, I'd like to try that. And 6 months later, I still haven't gotten around to it. Funnily enough, I did set a photo challenge a couple of weeks ago. And Fred, if you're in the Facebook group, make sure you get involved with that photo challenge. On the next one, I will set a deadline so you have a time limit to do it. And I can completely understand that as well. Sometimes you'll think of an idea or you'll have a project, but there won't be any deadline. So you won't be limited in time in doing it, or you won't have like a cutoff point where you have to work to. And this is why deadlines are really good. And you almost need to set yourself deadlines as well when you set yourself a challenge or you have an idea for a photograph. So if you haven't got involved with that photo challenge yet, I'll put the link in the description below. So go to that one and upload your photo. In future photo challenges, what I'll do is I will set a timeline so you do have that deadline point. The next question is from Harong Fu. I'm sorry if I pronounced that badly, but you asked, what's your favorite camera and lens? Now this is a good question, but I don't have a definitive answer for you. I really like the A7 III and the A7R III, but then I've a whole host of lenses that I've tried on it, and in different scenarios, I like different lenses. So say for instance, I'm shooting sports, I really like the 100-400. If I'm shooting portraits, the 85-1.8 is fantastic. It's such a sharp lens. If I'm shooting astrophotography, I really like the 25mm Batis. So it does depend what I'm shooting, and I have favorites for different scenarios. The next question is from Yannick Dula, and they ask, if everything in my frame is further away than my calculated hyperfocal distance, should I then always focus to infinity? Now for all of you that don't know what the hyperfocal distance is, if you Google it, the hyperfocal distance is a distance beyond which all objects can be brought into an acceptable focus. As the hyperfocal distance is the focus distance giving the maximum depth of field, it is the most desirable distance to set the focus of a fixed focus camera. So if everything is further away than that hyperfocal distance, then you can set your camera to infinity. So this will mean that when you're set at infinity, you've got an acceptable focus with everything in your frame. So I hope that answers your question. It is a technical one, and hyperfocal distances do change and you do need to calculate them, and you can get apps that calculate them for you. But like you said, if everything is past that hyperfocal distance, you might as well set to infinity, but make sure that everything is in focus by using your magnify tool to check the points. And especially once you've taken the photo, use the preview, zoom in to check your photo anyway. It's always good to check your photo before you leave the destination. Otherwise, you may get home, look at the photos, and something might be out of focus that you wanted in focus. The next question is from Shahjahan Photography. I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong. But Shahjahan asks, what do you enjoy most, scouting, in the field, or post-processing? I actually really like doing all of them. It's always good fun going out and scouting for a new location. It can be quite frustrating, but when you do find a good location, it's great. And it kind of gets you excited, and then you wait for the next really good conditions to come in. But that's one really good thing about scouting. In the field, this is what I do prefer. Getting behind the camera, taking photos, and having that moment where everything comes together in front of you. That's such a fantastic feeling, especially when you get a really good photo and you can see it on the back of the camera. As for post-processing, this is my least favorite part of it. I do enjoy it and it's fun creating an image, but sometimes I just don't get into it. So I'd much prefer to be behind the camera than editing. So I do try and get the image right in camera, but sometimes that's not always possible. But then I do bring it back, edit and get it done. So that's the long-winded answer, but a short answer is I prefer being in the field and being behind the camera taking photographs and just being out in nature, being out taking pictures of landscapes, of sports or anything like that, just getting out and taking photos. The next question is from Lee, and Lee asks, can you explain smooth video transitions? Now this is quite an ambiguous question, and video transition fads come and go. At the moment it's that zoom in, zoom out, swooshes and things like that. But I think the best transitions are straight cuts, and when you get a good straight cut or a slight crossfade, it works really well, and the best ones to do where you get a straight cut and you don't even notice it. Now there's a book by Walter Murch called In the Blink of an Eye, and it's this one. And this is a fantastic book to read. Walter Murch is the editor for Apocalypse Now, and he's done a whole host of other movies. In the book, he goes into lots of different principles of cutting and where to cut and how to cut. So even though I can't answer your question here because there's so much information to it, if you read that book, I put a link in the description below. If you read that book, you'll learn a lot about video transitions, video cutting, and video making in general. The next question is from David Hale Jr., and he asks, can you make a double exposure on the Sony a7 III? If so, how? Unfortunately, David, you can't. This is one thing that you have to do in post-processing, which is a little bit annoying. The next question is from Mariam Samadi, and Mariam asked a question in the last video, so thanks again for your question. And Mariam asks, is there anything you hate about photography? Now there's nothing I really hate in photography, but there are some tasks that are a little bit arduous, especially as a professional photographer. I've done some shoots recently where I've taken thousands and thousands of shots in a couple of days. Getting all of that information back on the computer and that first stage of editing is a little bit arduous. You're flicking through images and they're all quite similar, but you're picking out the best ones. Once I've got the best ones, I really enjoy editing them, and once I've narrowed it down to the few that I'm going to send to the client or that I'm going to use, I really enjoy tweaking and tuning those images, but that first step is a little bit arduous and a little bit boring. But what I tend to do is grab a beer, I get some music on, and I just flick through them slowly in the evening. The next question is from Adam Smith, and Adam asks, what are the best export settings or settings for export in general? Now I'm not sure if you mean video or photography. If you mean video exports, I have a couple of videos on those and I've linked them in the description below. Now if you're talking about photography, I've done one on exporting for Instagram, again that's linked below, but I might do a video quite soon on export settings in general. There's a lot to go into with it, so I'm not going to list everything here now, but what I tend to do is keep the image the same size so I don't drop the resolution at all, and I export as a JPEG. Now JPEG is really good because it's a compressed image. You don't want to be editing that image again, so once I've done all of my editing in Lightroom, I'll export as a JPEG. If you want to know my Lightroom workflow, again, there's another video in the links in the description. Lashik Mondrell asks, how do you create cinematic movements with a camera slider, dolly, gimbal, and even handheld? Again, this is another really big question, and getting that cinematic movement comes with practice and comes with experience. What I've found is you just need to get that bit of kit, and you can buy some quite cheap sliders. I think I still use I think it was like £60 slider. It's a 60 centimeter, maybe £100 slider. 60 centimeter slider, and I'll do it handheld. And what I've done, not handheld, I'll move it with my hand. It's not motorized or anything, but I'll just do it a couple of times until I get a nice steady shot. Alternatively, you can switch your camera to slow-mo and do it a little bit quicker, and that'll give you, again, that slow tracking movement. But it all comes down to practice. As for shooting handheld, I tend to switch it to slow-mo because that's an easy and quick way of doing it. But you want to get out and practice as much as possible. Have a look at the cinematic greats and watch a load of movies and try and see how they have that cinematic feel to the shots and almost try and emulate those shots. Again, I've mentioned it before, but you probably want to read this book, In the Blink of an Eye by Walter Murch. Again, that talks about editing, but editing is part of becoming cinematic as well. So the whole cinematic thing is across the board. It's not just how you shoot it, it's how you shoot it, how you edit it, how you color grade it, and how you maybe produce the sound design as well. So it's everything all brought together. The next question is from Christian Rold, and he asks, what is your thoughts on getting out of a safe job and into photography for a family guy? Now this is a tricky question. Anyone coming out of a job and wanting to get into photography or wanting to follow their hobby, it's a little bit tricky because you've got your family commitments and you obviously need to make sure you've got enough money to fund your family. On the other hand, you want to follow your dreams and follow what you want to do. So I'm guessing you're probably bored in your job and you really like photography and you want to move on to that. So the best thing to do is start doing small paid jobs in your spare time and see if it's something you actually really want to do. Doing corporate shoots and doing high stress photography is very different to doing it in your spare time or doing it as a hobby. And it really does add different pressures. I've just come off a 2-week stint of doing corporate photography for those 2 weeks, and it was hectic. There were some things that went right and some things that went wrong, but I've taken over 10,000 photos and I've got a ton of editing to do. So it does have its limitations and it does have its kind of drawbacks. It'll take a little bit of the passion away from your photography sometimes, but if you're really insistent on doing it, start doing jobs in your spare time and start trying to transition from one job to the other. A lot of people have cameras and a lot of people see themselves as photographers. And you will end up getting those few people that will micromanage you when you do a shoot for them because they've got a camera and they think they're a photographer. But it's one of those things that you probably just want to try first by doing some jobs in your spare time. And I'm not talking about just going out and doing a photo shoot. I'm talking about getting a customer and actually going out and doing it for them. Whether it's a portrait shoot for friends or whether you go along to a sporting event and offer your services to that company. Do something like that and have a deadline and work to it and see if it's something you like. If you do like it, keep doing them, keep building up your client base, and only really transition across to photography when you're making enough money from it. You will end up working all of the days under the sun, but if you're really passionate about it, you will stick to it. The next question is from Kay, and they asked, how do you merge bracketing in Lightroom? This is fairly straightforward. All you want to do is select all of your images, right click on them, go up to Photo Merge and HDR. You will have to choose the level of ghosting, which means if there's any movement in the shot or between shots, just choose high. If there's no movement at all between the shots, choose low or off, and then click on OK. That'll give you your merged image. So that's all the questions on the community tab. So now I'm just going to go over to Facebook and answer the few questions that I have here. First question is from DS, and they asked, did you set out to make photography as your career? If not, how and why did you get into it? Knowing what you know now, what would you have done differently? So that's a multifaceted question, but the main reason I got into photography was that in the mid-90s, I used to race motocross. I had a really bad accident and I broke my back and I wasn't able to do motocross anymore. So I really wanted to stay in the industry or stay in the sport because I loved it. And what I did was buy a camera. Unfortunately, it was film cameras in those days and it was really expensive. For 36 images, you had to buy the film, you had to get it processed. And so it was a slow, long process in learning photography. I did really enjoy it. And I ended up going to races and having 10, 20, 30 rolls of film, depending on how long the race was. And then it just got more and more expensive. So I just kept it as a hobby at that point. And then I slowly transitioned. I had lots of different jobs between now and then. But in the early 2011, I think it was, around 2011, I made the decision to become a professional photographer. So I really enjoyed it so much, and I actually came through videography first. So I became a professional videographer, and then I got more and more photography jobs as well. So my jobs and my career have been all over the place. Now, would I do it again? Yes. And if I was to do it differently again, I'd probably do a degree in photography. I'd learn as much as I could about it and start earlier. But in saying that, I've really enjoyed the path that I've been on, and I've done lots of different jobs and met lots of different people. So, we all have our different paths, and you can be all esoterical about it, but I've really enjoyed the path that I've been on, and I've done lots of different things, and I really enjoy photography now. I think maybe if I'd have started photography early in my 20s, I may have got a bit bored of it now, but I love doing it. And it's one of those things I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life. So I hope me rambling on just then answered your question. The next question is from Stephen Curtis, and he asks, have you thought about doing daily vlogs and filming while out on location? It might make some things easier to understand if we are there with you. Now, I'm not going to do daily vlogs because that is a ton of work, and I would literally be working all of the hours under the sun. I want to give you quality tutorials, and it does take time to edit them together. I pretty much spend all of my time doing that around the photo shoots that I have. However, I do want to make some tutorials like that. So what I want to do is bring you along on a few shoots, but I need to plan them properly and I need to film them properly. And to give you as much information as possible in a shorter time as possible, I want to edit them properly. So I'm not going to do daily vlogs. I'm going to keep it to 2 videos a week because this gives me enough time to edit the tutorials nicely. The next question is from Ashish Sherpathakali. I think I pronounced that right, but probably not. So again, I apologize if I've pronounced it badly. But Ashish asks, will you visit Nepal? Now, Ashish, me and my wife really do want to visit Nepal. We do a lot of traveling, and my wife's a teacher, so we get the chance to travel quite a bit during the summer holidays. So Nepal is definitely on our list of places to visit. When we do visit, we'll let you know. The next question is from Ruben, and he asks, how do you manage to cope with the expensive gear and lenses of photography? Now, I've been a photographer such a long time that I've built my gear up over the years. I did start off when I got into digital photography. I think I started off with the Canon 350D and I had the kit lens with it. I had that for quite a while. I might have bought a 35mm or a 50mm, but again, I slowly built them up. Now, as a professional photographer, I try and limit what I use and limit what I have. I do buy a lens, but sometimes I'll buy a lens and then I'll sell it to get another one. So once I've used one for a certain job, I might sell it on. Another way I do it is hiring kit. I don't do that many events, but when I do, I'll hire a 16-35 2.8 and the 70-200 2.8 as well. That is such a good combination for events photography. And I use my 2 camera bodies, or I may even hire another camera body. But when I have that, that gives me all of the range that I need. So I've built up my kit over the years, and I think I've got drawers and drawers of kit now. I'm not trying to brag. I'm just saying I do buy things that I don't need or I don't use. So what you'll find is you'll start off with maybe just the kit lens, but then you might get another lens the next year, and you might get another lens the next year. Then in about 10 years time, you'll end up with a really nice kit of camera lenses, bodies, and accessories to help you and your photography. The next question is from Sarthak Gupta. Again, pronunciation really bad, I apologize. Do you think it's necessary to click the same color photographs even though it might not look for that particular image, just so you can maintain a nice feed on Instagram? I know a lot of people do this, and I know a lot of people are quite successful on Instagram in doing this and having a certain color palette. But I think what they do is take photographs that suit that palette. Now, I don't do this at all. I'll have some bright ones, I'll have some yellow ones, I'll have some blue ones. Actually, I haven't posted on Instagram for a long time, and my feed is all over the place. But I don't think that's too much of a problem. If you want to become successful on Instagram, if you still can be, you may want to stick to a certain color palette, but just think about your photographs and think about how they would fit into that color palette. That's the best way to do it. Instead of trying to manhandle your photos into suiting that color, think about how you're going to take the image and how it's going to look afterwards. So you do some pre-planning, and take the photograph you want that will fit that color. So I hope I've answered that question. Next question is from Harris Kayakatos. Sorry, Harris. Again, my really bad pronunciation. Anyway, Harris asks, if you shoot a landscape that has a river and you want to make a long exposure in order to have that silky style of water, you use an ND filter in combination with a circular polarizer or just the ND. Now this all depends on the conditions that you have in front of you. If you have a lot of reflection off the water, you may want to use a polarizer as well as your ND. But if you like the reflections, or if the sun's, say, coming in at 45 degrees and you don't get that reflection, you don't necessarily have to use one. So I'd take both of them along and I'll put the ND on, I'll get the exposure where I want it, and then I'll have a look at the image. If there's a lot of reflections, or if the colors aren't saturated, I'll put the circular polarizer on and get it to the position I want it. The great thing with digital is you can take so many different images that you can take it with, you can take it without, you can rotate it and take it in a few different positions, and then you can choose afterwards. And then with that experience, you'll start to learn what works and what doesn't. Now, thanks very much for posting all of your questions. It was great to go through them, and there were some fantastic questions in there. And if I have answered your question, I hope I've given you a suitable answer. And if not, you can always email me. As there were quite a few questions on editing, if you want to learn more about my workflow in Lightroom, click on this next video here. And I've got probably a video that's best for you, linked down here. So make sure you click on one of those and keep learning. I'll see you next time.